Good morning, everybody. My name is Caroline Bowman, and I am the acting director at Smithsonian's Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome all of you here this morning, and a special welcome to our friends at the Department of Education from New York City for the third event of National Design Week. Cooper-Hewitt launched National Design Week in 2006, and it's been growing in popularity steadily since then. This is a map of the United States showing the design events happening this week. And if you click on any one of those, you can get more information about each exciting event. We affectionately call National Design Week NDW. And I'd like to just show you a slide from yesterday's teen fair. It's a little dark, but you can see Tim Gunn very enthusiastically speaking to over 400 high school students who were here speaking to over 50 designers about what it means to have a career in design and what it can lead to. So we had textile designers, industrial designers, architects, fashion designers. It was a terrific afternoon. Cameras are rolling because we webcast all of the events throughout National Design Week. So welcome to all of you across the nation and the globe. I am particularly pleased this morning to focus on the crucial theme of how business today can implement design and design thinking to spur creativity, innovation, and better business. Successful design is not just about great ideas. It's also about enlightened community and business leaders who turn design concepts into end results that make a real difference. It's a real pleasure to have Daniel Pink, author of A Whole New Mind, moderating this morning's panel with our very distinguished speakers. Daniel has brought design thinking to the forefront of business models, and we're in for a lively conversation. I'm going to turn over to Daniel, who will lead us through the morning and introduce the panelists, but please do ask questions to all of the panelists so that we do have an exciting discourse this morning. Thank you again, all, for being here early this morning. And I do want to shout a huge thank you to our sponsor of National Design Week since the start. Could the logo be any larger? Target. Thank you, thank you. And really, you should join us for every one of the National Design Week events if you can. We have the winners panel this evening in this very room, and the gala on Thursday evening at Cipriani's. It is usually at Cooper-Hewitt, but we have just started a very exciting renovation, and we have trailers in the garden, and that keeps us from having a large tent that will house all of the 600 guests. So again, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Target, and over to Daniel Pink and our discussion about how design can change the world. Thank you, Daniel.
All right, welcome. Welcome to this great discussion here for National Design Week. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be here in the Time Center. I am a Washingtonian. I live in Washington, D.C., and David Brooks, who works in the Times Bureau, New York Times Bureau in Washington, D.C., has this great line about life in Washington where he says, whoever dies having been on the most panel discussions wins. And so these folks are, vying for their score here. What we're going to do here, we're going to try to keep it reasonably informal. We're going to talk a little bit amongst ourselves, and we're going to open it up for questions. We'll very, very briefly introduce our distinguished panel here, and then I'll ask a question, and then we'll go. Down over on the far right, Jeanne Liedtka of the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. Jeanne has a distinguished career in a number of companies and an MBA from Harvard University. To her left is Bill Moggridge, who is a legend in the world of design, a Lifetime Achievement Award winner here, and co-founder of IDEO, whose book, Designing Interactions, a nice thick book, is a must-read. If you don't have it, take out your phone now, order it from Amazon, or your local independent bookseller, or Barnes & Noble, or Borders. As a writer, I have to be ecumenical about these kinds of things. And to my right here is Sam Lucente. Do not call him Lucent or Lucente, it's Lucente. Sam is the director of design at HP, Hewlett-Packard, which is an iconic company, an iconic brand that puts really touches our lives in a number of different ways. So here's the question. Let me start. So I have to go to a couple of colleges and universities later this week. And one of the questions that I always get from college and university students is that they want to know about their careers. And they often have, especially the more ambitious among them, often have these elaborate, carefully architected plans for what they're going to do. They're going to major in this. That's going to lead to that. It's going to inevitably lead to a job here, which is going to take them to a job there, to take them to this graduate school, and then on to some bright future in some kind of profession. And when I hear that, I always laugh because I know it doesn't work that way. And one of the things that I try to tell them is it's much more random, much more haphazard than that. And if you don't believe me, go out and find someone who's really interesting, someone whom you admire, and ask that person how he or she got to be doing what he or she is doing. And I guarantee you, 99 times out of 100, that person will answer that question, how'd you get to be doing what you're doing, the following way. The interesting people will answer it the following way. It's a long story. And so I want to start with that question first for Jeanne. Here, we're here at the intersection of business and design. How did you, MBA, HBS, BCG, the world of acronyms, the world of left brain reasoning, how did you get here, Jeanne?
Well, I usually think in any design discussion, it's my role to represent the most narrowly educated person in the room. And I think I'm probably safe there. I didn't even mention the undergrad in accounting that I actually started off with. So I got about as narrowly channeled as possible and wandered into design really quite by mistake. I teach strategy. In particular, I teach strategic planning. And I have a lot of business executives come to me, and we talk about strategic planning. And it was always such a dead discussion. And I thought there must be a more exciting way or metaphor or model to give them. And then I arrived at the University of Virginia, which if you've ever passed through Charlottesville, you know that Thomas Jefferson is still alive and well in Charlottesville. And of course, he designed the university, which we have preserved to every last detail exactly the way he designed it. And as I learned more about the story of his design of the university and what his aspirations were for education and why our university looks the way it does, I really began to think, wow, there's a really powerful story here about the relationship of design to creating a space that evokes in people the kinds of behaviors you want. And isn't that what we do as business leaders? We design spaces that evoke the behaviors that we want to achieve. And so that kind of set me off down the design path, and it is about 15 years later, and I live in an extremely confused state most of the time, where I go back and forth.
That would be Virginia, right?
Yeah, exactly. On many dimensions. I go back and forth between spending my time doing very traditional business analytics, which I still believe have a role, and then trying to figure out how to teach this wonderful, murky stuff around design thinking to our MBAs and the executives who come to Darden.
Okay, Bill?
Well, it may be a long story because it started a long time ago, but I'm afraid it's a bit boring. I mean, it's very simple. When I went to high school, I wasn't at all certain whether I wanted to be somebody who did art stuff or somebody who did sort of science and problem solving kind of things. So that schizophrenia has lasted all my life quite happily. But it led to discovering at the age of about 14 that there was such a thing as industrial design. And I thought, aha, that's for me. Because it had that balance of, I didn't know whether I was an artist or a problem solver. And so I actually just created a curriculum at high school that allowed me to study both the sciences and art, and then applied to a design school in London, went and trained in it, graduated in 1965, came to America for my first job in Erie, Pennsylvania, then went back to London because I found I didn't know anything about graphic design and I wanted to learn that with a bit of postgraduate, and then started a business in 1969. So it's been sort of boringly similar ever since.
That's a bit of an undersell of his story, but we'll get that. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, it is amazing how, how things just happen. I had studied the sciences much like Bill and was very interested in art. My parents actually sent me to an art institute when I was 5 years old, which was amazing.
Where did you grow up?
in Dayton, Ohio.
Get out, really?
Yeah. And went to the
No,
Dayton Art
I said that
Institute.
I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. So
you
we're,
did?
yeah,
Great.
yeah.
But what was amazing is there was a government-sponsored
I think that's
art
cool.
program.
These people are laughing that we're from Ohio.
We're
but
in
go
New
ahead.
York City.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead, Bill. I mean
guys
Sam.
from
So,
Ohio.
yeah.
No, but with this government-sponsored program, I really got into the notion of fine arts, but I absolutely love the sciences, also love sports, was on my way off to college to do something, much like Bill was saying, where I was trying to combine those three areas. 3 weeks before I went off to college, I found out about this thing called industrial design at the University of Cincinnati School of Design, Architecture, and Art, and was able to get into the program at the last minute. From there, through cooperative work-study programs, I knew that information technology was the area I wanted to work in. Went off to IBM, studied computer science as well. I wanted to understand as much about the notion of shaping software as I understood about the materials and processes of creating products. And went from IBM, went off to Netscape during the dot-com boom, drove a lot of the three-paned email and the browser work there, and then went off on my own, and then said I would never go back to corporate America, but went back into HP because you know, as a designer, you have to be deep in the system a lot of times, unless you're heading up IDEO. You need to be deep in the system and
Good partnership, I think.
it has been, you know, to really change things on a massive scale.
Right. One of the takeaways from these stories here is this kind of bridging of two different worlds. For Eugene, it's the world of business analytics with the world of design thinking, and for you guys as industrial designers, it's both of you talk about being interested in both the science side of it and in the art side of it. In the world of business, since we're here to talk about business, I mean, do you encounter people with those dual perspectives, or do you see it almost as two separate cultures, or how much of those cultures come together?
Well, I just completed a 3-year study that identified a set of business managers, operating managers, who had been unusually successful at growing their revenues over a period of time in a slow market. And we really unpacked in detail their personalities, their specific practices, and all of that. And what we found is that they really were a unique group of people who could navigate two worlds, who not only understood two worlds, but at some level thought like entrepreneurs in many ways, but then could navigate the corporate bureaucracy, the system that you're talking about, Sam, and oftentimes in very subversive ways. I mean, these people were just smiling subversives. They knew how to get stuff done.
Yeah.
They didn't fight the organization. They didn't take on the bureaucracy, right? They just kind of quietly figured out how to end run the system and get things done. And it was a real revelation.
And the two worlds that you say they inhabit, tell us, what are those two worlds? Is it the...
In some ways, if we look at it in a large organization, at least, which is the kind I spend my time in, there is this tension that never goes away between inventing the new and sustaining and preserving the old. So there's a base business that fuels the business.
Right.
And living in the kind of world of publicly traded organizations with quarterly earnings per share pressures, organizations, big ones, are designed for predictability and control. Right? And yet all of those designs, which make a lot of sense for the preserving and the building of the maintenance business, absolutely get in managers' way when you ask them to innovate and grow a business. And so those who succeed have to really, it's like navigating no man's land. You know, you don't really belong anywhere, but you're able to navigate both those territories to make things happen. And we spend a lot of our time thinking, now these people are naturals. the ones we studied.
Right.
No one ever gave them a class, or they didn't read any of our books to tell them how to do this. They just figured it out on their own. Probably not.
Oh.
I mean, sadly, they're more like entrepreneurs in that way, right? But I think the challenge that we spend a lot of time thinking about at Darden is knowing what we know about who these people are and their practices. How do we help all of the rest of the managers who've been taught all the wrong stuff?
Okay, but where did they? I want to come to you, Sam, because I think that what Jeanne is talking about is essentially your day-to-day life.
That's what I do.
But before I do that, when you say we think that they're naturals, where did they develop this ability to navigate those two worlds?
Yeah. Well,
What's your sense of that?
We've got a lot of educators in the room, so not surprisingly, these people have developed incredible repertoires over their life. If you look at them, they started out life with this conviction that it was really all about learning. And so often, the rest of us start out with thinking that life is about not looking stupid in front of other people. So they make all of these choices to have new experiences, to try new things, and they do it really thinking, I'm going to do that because I'm going to learn from it. And if I get it wrong, it doesn't really matter. When you accumulate a set of experiences over 30 or 40 years with that as your attitude, you have the raw material to be a fantastic innovator when we put you in the organization, right? You've got a lot going for you. Contrast that with someone who grows up in one of the silos that we love in my world, where someone's a great engineer, we raise them as an engineer for 20 years in an organization, and then we say, hey, go ahead this business and find some innovation opportunities. No matter how smart they are, they've got nothing to work with. They've got no repertoire. And so often those kind of people fail because of the way we've groomed them in many ways to fail.
Let's go to Sam. So how do you deal with this tension between maintaining the existing suite of products at HP, a giant suite of products, and then innovate and coming up with the next big idea?
Yeah, well, one big component of it is seeking out just the kind of people you're talking about, right? And I think a corporation that innovates is a corporation that makes room for those kind of people and room for those kind of things to happen. And HP definitely has a heritage with that. And I could name, out of the 317,000 people, I could name 100 people who that I work with in that way, right? These are people who know how to navigate, who know how to get the money to fund projects, and with internal VC-like activities, whatever, to innovate, right? They just know how to work it, right?
Do you have a sense of how did they develop that? How did they come out of the womb saying, oh, I can do internal VC projects, or did they have some experiences along the way that gave them those set of abilities?
They typically, for instance, one guy was, his training was in journalism, right? And then he got an MBA. So typically, these people have a very diverse educational background. Or they are married to somebody who's deeply in the arts. I see that often, which so you can't discount that. One of the guys who heads up marketing in the business is his wife is an architect. She's deeply into modernist architecture, and that has a big influence on him. So there's that at play as well. But then. In answer to your question, we also have to help the company bridge that divide between, this predictable, reliable world that we live in and this very, unpredictable world of innovation. And we have lots and lots of tools to do that.
So tell me about some of those tools, or even sort of in your own, as someone who's the head of design of a. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but what's really important to understand about HP is the size and scale of this company, in terms of revenue, market cap, and products. How do you allocate your time in those two worlds that Jeanne's talking about?
Well, we use this technique where as we talk to business, we do it we talk to them about design in three ways. It's design to differentiate, which everyone's familiar with, design to simplify and design to innovate. So typically designers and focus on differentiation, right? So wow factor, driving price premiums by having that resonance, emotional resonance with the product, and having a strong brand. And we're seeing that. We have laptops that are very expressive that sell at a high premium. But it's also about simplifying the product line. So design can drive tremendous efficiency across a product line. And so I kind of use that design to simplify approach where we have you look at the supply chain, HP drives an $80 billion supply chain. There's lots of room to make that efficient by just not only doing the kind of industrial engineering techniques and efficiency in production and things like that, but looking at it in this holistic point of view from how can that supply chain serve our customers. And by doing that, for instance, by producing one thing many times that makes the experience with the products easier, then you can affect tons of products. So that's really designed to simplify. But then in this design to innovate space, much like what Bill is doing, we have repetitive, scalable kind of tools that we use to innovate.
Give us an example of one of those.
So we'll go from, to when you go to create new markets, right? We'll go through what we call this design thinking model, which was derived from some work that Owens did out of Illinois Institute of Technology. So you move from observations to typically a company, will just go from observations. I see this product, I have to fix this thing. The market research told me that. Here's the solution. But what we do with this model is we can go from the observation to setting imperatives around the insights that you gain from that deep customer observation, and then set principles. And when you're setting those principles based on insights, you're really changing the strategy. So for instance, and from at that point you cycle back down into the solution. But the idea is that you get out of that very concrete, logical thinking into this abstract, world, and you can take people there. You can take big teams there through that. And like adding touch capability and PC capability to a printer is something that you would never come up with if you're just going from observation to solution, because customers can't tell you that. But if you take into consideration the digital transformation happening in the world, and you look at all these other factors in a very holistic way, then you can come to those kind of conclusions.
Now let's go to Bill for a second, because you have experience in that, long experience in that sort of setting, and you described yourself earlier as schizophrenic. Let's recast that and talk about it in some ways. What both Sam and Jeanne are talking about is almost what we might think of as almost bilingual. That is, being able to speak this language and that language and move smoothly across that border. Tell me how when you first started doing industrial design in the States in the late 1960s, so that's 40 years ago. Were you approaching it as systematically as Sam and HP are? Or tell me about how you approached a industrial design challenge back then, and whether it's any different now.
I think you can think of innovation as living in the overlap between three factors. You can really think of it like a Venn diagram. So if you think of the sort of technology stuff, and then you think of the business stuff, and then you think of the people stuff, it's in the middle there where those three overlap that you really get a chance to innovate. So in terms of where you start, traditionally the engineer guys have started from the technology. If you look at Silicon Valley with all its startups, it's got plenty of people who've invented a technology, and then they've tried to move towards that central position by looking for a market where people would like it and looking for money. Or if you look at somebody who's been to business school, or perhaps a venture capitalist, they'll start from that money side, and then they'll look for the technology and the people. In design, what we do is really start from the people side, but you still have to move into that overlap place in order to be successful. And I think it's that balance between the three that's always present. So if I go back to my early days, thinking of myself just as an industrial designer, I was always thinking about the people side. What will people like? What will be important to them? What values are important? How can I make it beautiful for them? How can I make them enjoy it? And the other factors were mostly provided by the bosses. You know, the sort of technology would be told to us as designers, and the business factors would be told to us by the bosses. So we were operating in that overlap, but somebody else was telling us what to do. The big difference now is that interdisciplinary teams who are using design thinking are coming together in order to create that all together. So on the same team, you have the business people providing the business point of view, and the technology people providing the technology point of view, and the people, including designers, but also human scientists, providing the people point of view. And we find that that design thinking combination allows innovation to flourish in a very rich way.
And how do you recruit for that? Is there a certain kind of business person who's able to do that, or a certain kind of design-trained person who's able to work in those sorts of teams? Or do you do something systematically or even informally within an organization to help people develop those abilities?
I think it comes back to what you were saying, really. We're always looking for the people who are interested in going across those. I mean, there is still room in the world, I think, for the siloed expertise, narrow expertise. But the people who are going to flourish in these innovative zones are the ones who are really happy moving across all the time. We call them T-shaped people.
Yeah.
You know, so you've got sort of great expertise in one area, but you're also interested in collaboration across those disciplines. We also have what we call cross-dressers, who look a little bit more like a pie, a mathematical pie, where they have two verticals. You may do it by marriage, as Sam said, but you can also do it in your own experience if you happen to have had a degree.
Tell me about these pie people, or I think, or cross-dressers, whatever you call them. It's basically, it's like this, basically, look like the symbol pie.
Mathematical pie, yeah.
Well, I mean, what are the two?
We find a lot of people that work at IDEO have got a degree in design, but they've also got a degree in business.
I see.
Well, they've got a degree in engineering, and they've got a degree in anthropology.
Right.
You know, they're sort of interested, that sort of form of schizophrenia, or two sides of the whole mind, actually come from education as well as experience. So you're looking for those people, the ones who have multiple interests, but also the interest in collaboration.
Right.
You don't have to have multiple interests. We don't need centipedes. What we need, T-shape is okay. You have to be great at one thing and really interested in working with other people across disciplines.
Right. Now, in your students, Jeanne, do you see, who do you see walking through the door of Darden? Do you see T's, cross-dressers, centipedes? Who's coming in, and how do you reckon with that?
Well, I think, at some level, at Darden, we have particular emphasis, and we think of ourselves as a general management program. So even though we send out plenty of consultants and investment bankers and those type of folks, we tend to draw people who want a broader perspective. And we emphasize things like teamwork and a lot of collaboration. So you're tending to draw people who have kind of inherent interest in working with other people and in having a broader perspective. Now, having said that, I think what I would have to note, the challenge of MBAs is that for 20-somethings stepping into the kind of complexity of business environment, the complex, abstract, analytical tools have a tremendous appeal, right? What to an experienced manager looks like naive enthusiasm on their part, for them is kind of, it's a magic wand that they wield. And so in many ways, it's a lot easier to teach operating executives who come in, who have real problems that the traditional methods have not helped them solve, and who are in a desperate search for ways to think more innovatively about their business and how to grow it. With the MBAs, you have to kind of, I think, lure them along because just the analytical stuff gives them so much comfort and solace.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
They're all the old joke about the young boy with the hammer everything looks like the head of a nail.
Right.
When we equip them with that.
Right. You guys both nodded ferociously to that idea. Tell me, what are you thinking?
Well, my comfort is
Yeah.
is drawing. You know, I think there are a lot of things you do that give you comfort. That's the skill you've gained, and there's a lovely feeling about exercising it. And it's too easy.
I see.
I mean, you can go on drawing the wrong thing forever, and you can go on hammering business nails in forever, and you can never address the problem that's really important. So
Right.
there's a balance, I think, between needing to be comfortable really doing stuff, but also pushing yourself beyond it in order to.
Well, it's another
struggle
interesting. I mean, it's another kind of interesting yin yang here of kind of a desire for competence, but also desire for or a need for novelty and pushing. But you were also nodding at that, Sam.
Well, I love that magic, and I was smiling because I've seen people do financial models and really enjoy it. But what's even, just fascinating to me is when we get them on these design thinking teams, and they'll build out a financial model which translates to design's impact on the business, in real hard numbers. And it just opens up a whole new world for them, a whole new challenge.
Bang my nail.
And one, Bill mentioned these interdisciplinary teams, and those are critical to solving these massive, complex problems. And two things I look for, and you mentioned it, the ability to collaborate with others, right? And then you also really look for that passion to change.
Interesting.
I mean, you see that in people, and when you get them on the team, you can. The whole goal of these design thinking teams, from my perspective, is to capture that collective IQ, to raise it. Typically, when you get in groups, it's lowered, but that's where
this being an example.
But when you apply the right methods, that's why these design thinking tools are so critical, because you can elevate that.
So that is that phrase design thinking is one that we hear over and over again. So we have a number of educators in the audience. I mean, how do we, if we want people to become design thinkers, not only for business, but for good citizens and to solve complex social problems, how and when do we begin developing those kinds of abilities? There's something we can do in elementary school, secondary school. Tell us about that. If we really want that, I mean, you guys have made a very persuasive case of sort of the type of mind that we think are most effective in solving problems. And I'm going to take the liberty of saying that the sorts of problems that you're solving at HP, or the sorts of problems that your students are solving, or the problems that IDEO are having, that kind of thinking can also help us solve some of these bigger social problems that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do we begin developing those? Is there a systematic way to begin developing that kind of thinking style?
Well, certainly it seems to me, and again, I'm not an expert in early education, but what you find in business organizations is so often the dominant value or driver is don't look stupid. Don't make a mistake. Stay away from things you don't know how to do. Focus in on where you're the expert, and my guess is that starts very early in someone's educational process. And again, if people pick up in elementary school this notion that life is about never looking stupid, to me, they're doomed from the start, because they're going to make a set of choices that are going to increasingly narrow their repertoire. And of course, I say that as someone with possibly the most narrow repertoire in the world. So I don't know quite how to explain the end of one.
Also as someone who took an accounting degree and went to a business school to start teaching design, which is a risk of, which puts you at risk of looking stupid.
Pretty broad.
Yes. No, I would say my faculty colleagues would probably say they wish I had more fear of looking stupid in their view.
But I think that's an interesting point. And for those of you who are interested in exploring this, is actually there's a psychologist now at Stanford, used to be at Columbia, named Carol Dweck, who has done an enormous amount of research in this. And just to you know Carol Dweck,
Yes, I think.
And so it's basically what she says is that there are essentially two kinds of it's basically a theory, your own theory of intelligence. You can be what's called have an entity theory of intelligence or a growth theory of intelligence. If you hold an entity theory of intelligence, then every encounter you have is essentially a measure of that entity. That is how much you have. So of course you don't want to look stupid. If everything that you do is saying, oh, it's an evaluation of how, how deep your intelligence pool is, then you're not going to take on hard challenges. If you think that intelligence is something that can be developed, then you actually seek out those kinds of challenges. It's sort of the difference between, I mean, to analogize, it's sort of, do you think of intelligence and talent and capability as something that, like height, which is pretty difficult to change, or do you think of it as something like sort of physical fitness, which is something that you can absolutely change? And I think that's a profound point, and you see it, and I think it starts early, and again, I think it's not only starts in schools, I think it starts in homes.
Now, the interesting point with Carol Dweck, though, is she insists that you can change that. I mean, I think that's the reassuring news from her research.
Absolutely,
which says, we pick this crazy stuff up, but it isn't hardwired into us. We can create environments that teach people that learning is good and that failure is okay.
Right, Bill.
I think it's more than that. I mean, we beat it out of them. You know, if you go to kindergarten or elementary school, all the kids are having fun doing design. And then we tell them, you've got to stop. You've got to do these 3 R's. You've got to do the boring stuff. And so we beat out the creativity. I'll tell you a personal story just to build on my starting point. As I said, when I was at high school, I had to create my own curriculum to allow me to study both art and the sciences. But in Britain, they started a program under Maggie Thatcher where design became a major high school subject, where you could be qualified in it just as much as you could in a language or a science. And so since that time, it's become normal to study design as a major subject. I went back to my same high school 40 years later, and I found that there was a design department. And the amazing thing was there were 3 or 4 kids there who were doing projects in that design department which were about the same level as the Stanford undergraduate students I was teaching. So by having the topic at high school level as a major topic, it's been possible to see a real growth in the awareness and the practice of the skills of design.
Yeah, that's in the UK. Here in the United States, we
nothing, nada.
But I think that's. I mean, again, I don't mean to be pessimistic. I think that offers a really great opportunity. Sam.
Well, I just go back to my childhood, and it was so transformational for me to be working as a 14-year-old with accomplished artists who they brought in, and in this government-sponsored program, and I know that changed my life. I know that changed how I thought about the world.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, based on what Jeanne and also what Carol Dweck is saying, because I think your perspective is really interesting here. We're talking about risking looking stupid, of taking chances and so forth. That's hard in a publicly held company, and one as huge as yours. I mean, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but in order for you guys to have even a fractional amount of growth in revenues, you got to sell a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, we're the world's largest technology company at $118 billion, and we're in 170 countries. It's it goes on and on.
Approximate number of sort of products you have across the whole suite of not only consumer,
tens of thousands of products. So so we're working on everything from laptops and small handheld computers all the way up to massive, data systems, and so you're spanning this very wide.
What do you do as a leader to say to help people say, you know what, it's okay to make a mistake, it's okay to look stupid when you have the specter of Wall Street and institutional investors ready to clobber you for not hitting your quarterly earnings?
Yeah, the quarterly earnings, that it's critical, that must be met, but you can so we never jeopardize that. What we're able to do now, though, with these techniques, again, this notion of using design to simplify, differentiate, and innovate, we actually can track all of these programs. So we have X number of programs going on throughout the company. We know, because the designers, this relatively small network of designers, and it's really a social network, through them, through our design council, we can track who's doing what kind of project. So we can say there are X number of design to innovate programs. There are X number design to differentiate programs and design to simplify. And what you can do, for instance, in a printer portfolio, you can, as a product nears the end of its life, you can drive efficiency, actually take design out of it, take features out of it, you know, things like that, and then use
to
that
lower the
money
cost, or,
to lower the cost. That lowers the cost across that whole P&L for that particular business, and then you can, within that business, and you know, it's measured,
right.
you know, the profit and loss is measured within the individual businesses. We can work with them to say, okay, we're going to lower cost here, we're taking out design here, but let's put this money aside to invest here. And it's this constant balancing act at that business unit level.
Let's talk about design thinking a little bit more. MFA, is an MFA a way to become a design thinker? Anybody? Bill?
I think of design at three main levels. The bottom one is design awareness, which is probably what the kids at high school get when they start, but it's also what everybody does in terms of their private lives, you know. I mean, we all choose what we wear and what our rooms look like, etc. So everybody's aware of design, and they use design in their lives, and everybody's a designer in that sense. Then you have all the design skills, and there's this long tradition of going to project-based education in design schools for architecture or for graphic design or for any of the design disciplines. Those are the people who have the talent, and they also get very good at actually doing the design realization component. But the level above that is this design thinking. And that's where you're using these same intuitive techniques. You're using project-based approaches. You're using the generation of alternatives. You're starting with studying people and what their latent needs and desires are. You're moving towards an abstraction of the idea. You're creating prototypes. You're bringing new alternatives into the world. Now, if you can have a team of people doing that, who are all from the different backgrounds, using design thinking methods, only maybe one of them's a designer, but they're coming together, and they find that their shared creative mind is much more powerful than in the addition of the individual ones.
Right, that's very much what Sam was saying. Where do they learn that design thinking?
You know, if you look back at engineering or marketing, right? Marketing developed a whole set of tools, really came to power in the 50s. And it was because they were able to codify this knowledge and these techniques. And I think that's what you're seeing happening in design right now. So there are different techniques that are emerging. And so if I were out there in business right now, I would bring those techniques into my life. I would read books about it. I would practice those techniques. If you're in school, definitely I would broaden my education as much as possible. But it is, as Bill's saying, there's the kind of hard skills that you learn as a designer, right? Which you may or may not choose to do. But then there are these higher strategic thinking skills that I think anyone can learn. And what I've found is on these teams that, my experience is that just about anybody can learn anything given the right motivation on a team.
I think that's how human beings are hardwired.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great for designers.
It's true for our kids too. But Jeanne.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do in business organizations is often help people to unlearn things.
Yeah.
Because the reality of it is, we make innovation riskier than it needs to be because of a set of bad habits we've developed in large organizations. We do things like tell managers, only bring us big ideas. If it's not a needle mover, we don't want to mess around with it. Right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, that just dooms everyone from the start to go bet big. On something that if it was that obviously a win, all of your competitors would be doing it already. I mean, it's just stupid in retrospect, but it's a consistent theme. We do all kinds of things that just don't make any sense. The whole notion of prove it to me in a PowerPoint presentation
before
I'm allowed to go talk to a customer about it. Now, talk about a recipe for a giant expensive fiasco if you ever actually get out of the conference room, which we know people mostly don't.
Right.
Because it's a game they can't win. I mean, the professional doubters will poke holes in your poorly extrapolated data because you're using data from the past to try and justify some idea in the future. I mean, how crazy is that? And yet that's the way we run things. I mean, to me, the first thing you say to a manager is, leave the building. Go find one customer, conduct a small experiment, don't tell corporate about it. And a few experiments later, if it works, then you tell the boss because you need a little money, right? So part of it is just empowering people to do stuff that to an entrepreneur just looks self-evident, but because of the kind of crazy way we've trained managers, looks like a really scary, vulnerable thing to do.
Well, so I know you want to jump in on this too, because this is just what we do. So when I first went to form the design practice at HP, we were faced with this problem, right? And so what you find is through these techniques, design can actually lower the risk of innovation in a big way. So, for instance, we needed to, after HP and Compaq merged, and actually HP's acquired something like 37 companies, so there's this constant change. But what this technique we learned is, typically designers will put out that big concept, right? Just like you're talking about, the big PowerPoint. And that's absolutely, you just don't want to do that, right? So, and then you have the day-to-day development stuff. What we did is something in between called design archetypes, where for each of the major product lines, we worked with outside design firms, and Bill and his team led a couple of these big programs with our internal designers, but we were able to build exactly that, a design archetype, a reference model for what that particular business would create the next year. And
is that archetype what's its physical state? Is it a physical model? Is it a report, a set of projection of numbers? Everything.
It's as we got into it, it got much more sophisticated. We built financial models into it. That's what I was talking about, where we brought the actual financial analyst into it. But so it's definitely a physical model. It takes into consideration the supply chain, the current printer mechanism, for instance, and it's great for mature product lines because it allowed these businesses, it showed them how to innovate with very little risk. And in each case, 80% of these 47 archetypes that we've done have been successful in the marketplace with market share, with higher profits, stuff like that.
Right.
And we have 40 business cases now to track that, which also lowers the risk. So we can talk to management and actually show them these business cases.
That's a very interesting point, because we tend to think of design as kind of wild and woolly, let's take a big risk. But the point that design can actually lower the risk is actually a pretty important point here. Bill, you wanted to get in.
Yeah, I think the challenge for education at university level is that universities are even more siloed than the world.
Yeah.
That the professor tends to be very specialist, and then he has a little empire or kingdom, which he or she can develop and keep narrower and narrower. So the idea of interdisciplinary collaboration is quite difficult to structure. David Kelly started the Stanford D School, which is absolutely about that. And what he wanted to do there as a professor, he's a co-founder at IDEO, what he wanted to do there as a professor was to bring what we learned at IDEO into the educational environment and allow people from different disciplines to collaborate at school rather than just waiting until they were pushed out into the world from a very specialist education. And he came up with this clever concept of making it a postgraduate program that doesn't offer degrees. So people are getting masters in whatever topic they're getting. And then they can come to the D School in order to collaborate with other people. I teach a course there called Transformative Design, and we have 26 students with 4 faculty. And only one of the students, or 2 of the students, are usually designers. There are a lot of them in business, a lot of them are human sciences, technology, and so on. So they're all doing their masters in their different subjects, but they're given the opportunity to learn about the process of interdisciplinary collaboration in a place that's specially dedicated towards that. One of the things that David asked me to do when he was starting this a few years ago was to look around the world and see if there are any examples that we could learn from that already existed. And there were lots of examples of design being taught in business schools or collaboration between an engineering department and a design department, that kind of thing. But there was only one school that was really comparable to the D School, and that was in Helsinki, which has the combination between the Helsinki University of Technology, of Business and Art and Design. And they've been working on a program exactly like that for 14 years. And they have exactly the same method, that they make it something that master's students can take as an option rather than awarding in separate degrees. In that way, they avoid all the competitiveness that would be the case if they tried to compete with the conventional departments. I think there's going to be huge growth in that kind of education.
Yeah. Jeanne.
You know, I'm optimistic, though, because we've got some evidence from Darden that even faculty are capable of learning if you can just demonstrate the power of outcomes. We're rethinking our MBA program right now, inspired by the work of the people here. And one of the things that we talked the team into was this idea that, gee, maybe we should actually use some of these design techniques to see if they could help us innovate. So we went out and did experience mapping of our students. Because we all care about the satisfaction of students. We want them to have a good experience.
Explain to us what experience mapping is.
Well, essentially in experience mapping, you just trace the journey of the customer, right? From the beginning of the process to the end of the process. And in particular, you're looking for the emotional highs and lows. So it's less what's happening to the customer, what are they doing there, then how are they feeling, how are they experiencing this? With the notion, of course, that your greatest opportunities for innovation just begin by getting rid of the lows in their experience. Right? So we set off to do this, had a group of students do it on a project, and had the students present it at the last faculty meeting of the year in May. And one of our veteran decision analysis faculty, so we're talking quant guy, right, said to me afterwards, I've been here for 30 years, and I learned more in the last hour about the reality of our students' lives than I learned in the last 30.
Wow.
Because they realized that we had been projecting our view of the world as faculty onto our students for so long that they were living this completely different reality. And guess what? What we did in the classroom didn't matter nearly as much as we thought it did. And so, so many of the opportunities for innovation weren't our continuing to hammer the curriculum debate, but to step outside and say, you know, how do we help them get jobs? How do we help them, you know, get invited to the right parties on Friday night? I mean, it was all kinds of crazy stuff that would never have occurred to us. So, and you know, do we now have a group of faculty who are designers like IDEO? No, but they understand how powerful it can be now, and I think we've softened the edges, and they're willing to experiment and try some new things.
Because of that experience, what were the lows for the MBA students? I mean, what were the things that you would want to kind of scrub out of their experience?
Well, mostly, and again, this won't surprise anybody in this room, it's all about getting the job. Right? And of course, as faculty, we think all that stuff on recruiting is kind of an annoyance that we have to tolerate as part of our real mission, which is to do the classroom stuff, right? So we began to understand, one, how critically important this group of people was in our organization, who were running the recruiting office, who we have tended always in faculty to see as second-class citizens, because we're doing the important stuff, they're doing the unimportant stuff. And I think we began a real dialogue with them about how do we collaborate across these different areas to really enhance the student experience around thinking about what they want to do when they grow up, how to be more effective in interviews, how to succeed in their first job, a whole set of issues that we had a lot of knowledge to bring to bear, but that we had never really identified as critical to their experience before.
Big contrast to design students, by the way, who are not motivated by getting jobs. That's probably why they don't get them. They're motivated by beautiful stuff.
Let's, on that note, let's open it up to some, I got a bunch more questions, but let's open it up to the folks out here. We've got 2 standing mics, so you'll have to come out of your seat, walk to a mic. Not sure that's the most elegant design for this. But and if you can say who you are and maybe what you do or how you got here.
Hi, I'm Lisa Lurie. I'm a designer, and there are designers here in this room among educators. So this question is directed to Bill, but I'd love to hear all your response on it. It's this. Why is it that true change and innovation is perceived as a threat? Like just intuitively, like on an almost molecular level, cellular level? And how do you manage that?
Yeah, I do think it's that comfort factor that we were talking about before. You know, that we all get good at stuff, and it's so much more comfortable to execute our skills and to just continue to do that. So, you know, if you're kind of depressed or worried, what do? You go back to the thing you know how to do really well, and you do it. And that's very comforting and comfortable. So anything which is really about change, innovation, or any form of cultural change, personal change, transformation, is actually very challenging just because we have to rewire ourselves, and doing that is not comfortable.
And I personally think that's why designers and business people often have a lot of trouble getting together. Fundamental values are different. The fundamental value of business people is generally, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because I got this big, complex organization with all kinds of unintended consequences. Every time I meddle with it, I raise the chance that I'm really going to mess it up, right? Whereas designers, you know, if it isn't broke yet, let me get in there and break it. Because what I'm uncomfortable with as a designer is the status quo. I mean, I hate the status quo, and I want to change it just for the sake of changing it. So in my experience, designers go in and just scare the hell out of business people because they think they're going to go in and break the stuff that works, right? And so I think there's this tension that comes from two very different value systems who need each other, but who scare each other in many ways.
But I would say that what I've learned, you know, throughout my career, especially working, you know, in a company like HP, is that I never want to be perceived that way, right? Yeah. I want to be perceived as another function in the business that will drive incredible profitability. And so, for instance, talk about like massive change. So think of a guy who leads a business who makes, you know, 3 PCs every second, right? He ships 3 PCs every second. He does not want to disrupt that supply chain, that business at all. However, we did really deep experience mapping, like you were talking about, but then we overlaid it with the value chain and the whole business model. We dissected the whole supply chain. You know, we found that lifestyles were changing, that this whole notion of work and play, kind of consumer versus the commercial space, you know, that was changing, and there were big trends around that we could document. And so by methodically taking him through this, he you know, as head of this business, you know, shifted that business so that it now can cater to 2 lifestyles, but off of one common platform. Massive savings, right? And so you kind of open their eyes to that. You know, the other area where, you know, we all fear changes around printing, right? People are printing less. It's a big part of our business, but digital transformation is happening big time, right? And so, you know, so we can kind of, as designers, as corporate strategy people, as head of marketing, we can document these trends and kind of say, hey, we have to change. You have no choice. By this time out in the future, this shift is occurring. So I think you can paint a picture that where, you know, people understand they have to change, and then you kind of show them how to get there, a path to get there.
Thank you so much.
Hi. Ooh, is this on? Yeah. I'm Jana, and I am the person you've been talking to. I'm in transition. I'm working between set design, creative direction, project management. All of the panel members have sort of touched on this every person, like the designer, marketer, the scientist, business person. I actually do have degrees in both business and in design, and I've found that in my job search, I've been facing a lot of confusion towards that as opposed to the positive reaction I thought I would get. I don't know, do you feel that it's still a new idea to business owners with this multi-degree person? Is there a special way to spin it, do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the questions we get a lot is how do you recognize one of these natural growth leaders? And one of the things that's frustrating is I always say, well, if you look at their resume at 30, you can't tell if they're building a broad repertoire or are just flaky and can't hold a job. Because what you see is people who don't look like everybody else, right? They've tried a lot of different things. They've done these degrees that don't look like they go together. And in general, we're all very suspicious. We're out recruiting people who look like us, right? And so I think that's the challenge. How do you portray yourself and your skill set as being able to produce a set of outcomes other people can't? Because if you just look at what we would call a rich diversity of experience on a resume, to your average person who's recruiting, it just looks like someone who can't make up their mind about what they want to be when they grow up.
Yeah, I think you have to look in the right place.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more cross-dressing in San Francisco than other parts of America.
And my advice would be to, Bill described the T kind of person, and the key component of that is that you kind of demonstrate deep, specialized skills in one area. And so what I would suggest is that you kind of decide, okay, if I'm going for this job, then I really have to focus in on my mastery of this particular skill set, right? Because a company wants you to kind of hit the ground running in that, and then once you're in, they'll, much more quickly now than even 5 years ago, they'll see your broader skills and put those to use.
Yeah, I would add one thing also is don't confuse a down labor market with a problem in your repertoire. That is it's very hard to get a job now, period. And so think about the context of the economy right now is contributing to this as well. So don't, in a wholesale way, abandon this cool, groovy thing that you're doing because it's a crappy economy.
And that's cool that you're doing set design. So the people who formed the industrial design profession started in that area. Raymond Loewy and Dreyfus. Great.
Hi, my name is Angelina Russo. I'm one of those terrible professors from Australia. Look, at the moment there's a rise in literature which sort of situates design within new business models, and two of the authors of some of those methods are here today on stage, and Roberto Verganti is another one who's developed this idea of design-driven innovation. And we've been talking about risk aversion and that idea of not making mistakes. But so, what strikes me as one of the most innovative industries of our time, software development, has actually been outsourcing mistakes and the development of software from its inception. Sam, you spoke earlier about a collective IQ that develops within the team. And given that we are, in fact, living in an increasingly participatory culture, what I'm interested in is how do you incorporate a larger collective intelligence or a crowdsourced intelligence, if you like, into the design process? Or do you, and if you do, how might you see that as a future process for designers?
Now, that's a great question. And when I first tried to build the design practice at HP, I kind of did the thing that Thomas Watson Jr. did it at IBM with Elliott Noyes, and the notion was centralize all the designers to then decentralize them. That absolutely, I realized that information technology had changed so dramatically that the changes on a day-to-day basis are so disruptive, there was no way the notion of a centralized function would work. So we began to build out this social network And so in answer to your question, the way we do it is by wiring this social network. So you have lots of different ways to communicate. You have, we have these Halo video conferencing systems. We have this tool we built internally called Virtual Classroom, where we're able to share data real time. We just, and also out of this need to communicate across long distances, across, you know, all the different continents, we created this thing called Skyroom, which gives like HD resolution ability to video conference. So an engineer, a systems engineer, and a designer can be in Bangalore showing us something, spinning it on the screen, talking to us in their office. So it's those kind of tools that are absolutely critical. The other thing is that we do this thing where you have to really understand at an emotional level, you know, and this gets to what you talked about in your book on the, you know, or several of your books, but you have to really understand what you're creating from an emotional point of view. And that's the hardest thing to convey. And we do that through having a real strong core brand story, and then we translate that brand story into these design behaviors. So each of the designers knows kind of intrinsically what things should feel like to be HP.
Do you sort of building on that question a little bit, do you, in this collaboration, do you ever, to what extent do you collaborate outside the walls of the firm itself?
Oh, yeah, in big, big ways, right?
I mean, it's like if you look at what, well, go ahead, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's everything we do now is, you know, we're working with competitors who are also our partners, so, so there's that whole thing going on. We're building everything on industry standard components to break down those walled gardens. And so that means everybody can play, so we can play with value-added resellers. We can go through lots of different channels. And then when we kind of pride ourselves on working with customers in a very collaborative way, and you have to do that. The experiences, when we try to map these experiences, I thought after studying industrial design and getting down materials and processes, and then studying computer science and understanding software, that, okay, now I'm beginning to understand this, and then these really complex experiences come along, and cloud computing and digital transformation and sustainability, and so you're having to deal with really complex things, and so I don't know, that there's just lots of different ways to deal with it.
Yeah. Bill, you want to?
I think one of the miracles of the last decade is this crowdsourcing thing that's happened to us. I mean, who would have believed that Wikipedia would be more successful than Encyclopedia Britannica or Encarta? And where did it come from? It came from people having fun designing their own contributions, just doing stuff, doing it because they want to do it. Now, it's interesting talking to Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, in that he doesn't, he belies the idea that it's just voluntary. There is a very strong and interesting structure. He calls it a monarchy, where there are people who actually police the quality of what people write and correct the problems, get rid of the bad stuff. And it has a sort of hierarchical element. And any really difficult problem is resolved by his decision at the top. So there is a structure that enables crowdsourcing that I think we need to understand more if we're going to be able to leverage it in the future.
Yeah, Jeanne.
I think the other thing that I would just want to note, though, is at some level, it's also just at a very basic level about how we talk to each other as human beings. I mean, Peter Senge has talked for a long time about the difference between dialogue and debate. What we're good at in organizations is debates.
Absolutely right.
And we know that debates rarely ever lead to higher order solutions.
Right.
You need to be able to engage in dialogue.
Absolutely.
Well, how do you help people engage in dialogue? One of the very simple techniques we teach managers is hypothesis generating and testing. Don't spend your time selling your idea, treat it as a hypothesis, and invite the doubters in to tell you what assumptions they think you're making that just are not don't turn out to be true, and then ask them what data they need to believe you, and go out and actually get the data out of the real world. It's amazing when you move into that kind of hypothesis-driven discussion how much you can stop this gridlock that is just, you know, the finance people debating the marketing people about what the customer really wants. You know, well, go get the data, ask them, you know. And if you can just get people out of the conference rooms and stop debating PowerPoint stuff and go talk to some people, again, you can often bring people along.
One of the great life lessons, something I tell my own kids in multiple meetings, is just ask. Okay, so like if you want something, just ask. If you're curious about finding out something, just ask. It's amazing that people will often tell you because they like being asked. So just ask. Yes, just ask a question.
I shall. Thank you. Helen Walters from Business Week. There's a lot of talk. You've talked a lot about the need to learn how to accept failure. And it seems like the idea is that when you undergo the design thinking process, that there is no such thing as failure. But I wonder if Bill and Sam and Jeanne, if you have an example, if you can give a specific example of how you've been able to repurpose failure within your businesses in order to kind of take that thinking and take that learning and use it somewhere else.
Well, I think if you accept the idea that you're going to create a lot of alternatives as part of the creative innovation process, then prototyping is going to be an essential tool. And of course, the more often and earlier you prototype, the more likely you are to succeed faster. So that really embraces failure, because obviously you only prototype right at the beginning because you know it's really likely to be wrong. So you want to see what's wrong quickly and move on to the next idea in order to have time to evolve. You know, if you look at the challenge of real innovation when compared with incremental improvement, that really is one of the big difficulties. That in incremental improvement, you have all this stuff behind you you know already works, and then you just try and make it a little bit better in some small way. But if you're out here in this wild, woolly innovation land, you really have no idea about whether anything's going to work. So if you embrace failure in the process, and you have lots of prototypes of all the little components that make some solution up, and you see those fail, and then you move on to another idea, that one does work a bit, let's try that. And you can find that by embracing many failures on the way to success, you'll get there faster and more successfully.
Yeah, and absolutely you want to fail early in the development process. So I'm sure many of you have seen the studies where, you know, the things you define in those conceptual stages drive 70% of your cost, right? Yeah. So imagine that, you know, if we don't get things right up front, imagine what that translates into, you know, supply chain, you know, the kind of thing we're dealing with, right? So we have to fail up front very early with these design visions and design archetypes, and you have to get out to customers with them. The other thing we'll do is a lot of just limited production stuff to see what works, what doesn't. So, and what I've found is it's interesting. You also have to stick with things and watch the failures and improve upon it. So we're now in our third generation of what we call our TouchSmart PC. It's a TouchSmart all-in-one. You know, we had a lot of great technologies there. We've invested heavily in this whole notion of immersive interaction, where you combine voice and hand gestures and touch technology together. We're just in the infancy of this, but the first product we created around with this touch capability, you know, didn't do so well, right? We produced it in low volume. We saw problems with ergonomics, things like that, but we quickly improved upon it in the second generation. Now the third generation is really catching on. We're actually making money with it.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something?
We found that the successful managers who do this really do what they call a learning launch. And again, it's explicitly set up, this is an experiment, and we know in an experiment, the only real source of failure is the failure to test the assumptions, right? And so we expect to iterate and change and refine and improve, and that's the expectation we go in with, as opposed to what's often our expectation for managers that's important to their career, which is you're going to go in and you're going to succeed 100% of the time. And we know that's a completely unrealistic expectation when we start to innovate.
Yeah, and if I could just add one quick thing. We tend to, there's almost like there's failure with a capital F and failure with a small f. Failure with a capital F is, the Edsel or New Coke or those kinds of big, iconic, colossal, disastrous failures. And those are failures. But I think that real success is built on a lot of those small Fs, and I see it. I mean, where did Helen, as a writer, to analogize to the field of writing, Anne Lamott, who wrote a number of great books, but she has a great book about writing called Bird by Bird, and she says the secret to writing, I can't use one of the adjectives she uses, but the secret to writing is expletive deleted first drafts. Starts with SH. Ends with Y, all right? And so she says the secret to writing are these shooty first drafts, and that's failure with the small f. That is, it's basically the writer's version of a prototype. Okay, I put it out there. Ooh, that's weak. That's weak. That's weak. Do the next iteration. Do the next iteration. And so I think that's really the secret. It's being willing to take that small f failure and not let it get to the big F failure. Yeah. Now we have time for I think 2 questions over there on the left.
Okay, my name is Fritz Desir. I'm here on behalf of the Interaction Design Association. And so you guys have talked, a couple of times about how important it was to get sort of, I guess what Bill calls like design awareness at a young age. So here in New York, and you guys talked about this too, I mean, there's no real education as it pertains to introduction to design or design thinking or, anything like that. That's not seen as a valid path, for young people. And there's some young people that are challenged, or actually I say not challenged in school, and kind of looking for, other things and ways of developing other parts of themselves that they don't even know existed. So it took me about maybe 25 years to even understand the world that we're talking about now. And I think the world we're moving into is going to require kids to kind of get that sooner. So, and it's not going to happen in the Board of Education. I just don't think I don't see it, because they're kind of geared towards, test scores and so forth. So I'm thinking, what are your thoughts on getting sort of design education, which I think can be used for products, services, or even to design your life? Like, how do we get that at a younger level, from prototyping to research skills to, how do we, how's that, how can that happen? If you guys can just sort of off the cuff think about that. And then if there are any good books that you'd recommend, that speak to design and business thinking, that maybe, if we can't get a program in place, maybe there's something that people can pick up and read or pass along, or, I mean, I know it's a long question, but whatever you guys think.
Well, there's this great book called A Whole New Mind.
That's definitely the right starting spot. Yeah. I think, wouldn't it be nice if the Smithsonian decided to qualify design programs in all levels of education? Thank you.
Yeah. There you go. Well, rapid prototyping right up here.
Yeah.
I sit on the board of directors for the Industrial Designers Society of America, and this is such a critical, challenge, and I think we have to step up to this, right? We need to bring some big initiatives, forward to the government. This institution is a great one, to do that. But I think IXDA, DMI, IDSA, AIGA, all these different design professions, now is the time to come together and just put some emphasis on this. And we've talked a lot about it, and things have shifted now where the momentum is such that we need to do it. It's as I was listening to you talk, it really is amazing that design is just so buried, especially through K through 12, right, in America.
I think be careful about the books. Much as it's important that you read The Whole New Mind. I mean,
you actually, again, you don't have to read it. You just have to buy it.
Where do you buy it?
The whole tenet of design education is learning by doing.
Absolutely.
So you want to read the book after you've done some, or at the same time as doing it, but not instead of.
But that's actually, I want to jump in here. There's a, if you think about, I think the good analogy to books, which is not mine, it's from a guy named James Paul Gee at Arizona State. It's, think about playing a video game. Okay, nobody under age 45 ever reads the manual first before playing a video game, because it doesn't make that much sense. Now, you start playing the video game a little bit and experiment with how it works, then you can read the manual. It actually makes a lot of sense. And so I think that's the analogy. Yes?
I think the one other thing I'd say, it's kind of an outsider to the design world. You know, most people just have no clue what design thinking even means. What's the set of skills that are really part of that? And so I think when we begin talking about developing empathy skills, for instance, developing observation skills, using visualization rather than just words or numbers for everything, I think then it begins to become more concrete for people who just find the term design thinking a bit of a mystery and don't really know what it is you want to teach their kids when you say that. So I think getting more explicit about what is the skill set we're talking about under this larger label of design thinking would be one way, I think, to help educate people about why this is so important.
And one other thing, Bill's colleague, Tim Brown, has a really interesting new book out. The title of it is
Change by Design.
Change by Design, which is a really interesting book about design thinking, just out.
Yeah, thank you.
One last question here.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Green. I'm a fashion design student. I have my associates, and I'm working on my bachelor's in women's sportswear. I started out early. However, when I got to college, I found myself doing more liberal art courses rather than courses within my major. I kind of lost my contact with design, so how can I hone into getting back into that design, or getting back to focusing on my design aesthetic?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, if you think about the skills part of design education, that is really doing and doing and doing. And you learn from that and you get better at it. But that doesn't necessarily help you too much with thinking about stuff in the long term. So it may be very valuable for you that you've done some more general educative stuff, because that may come back to help you 10 years on when fashion design business will have changed dramatically in ways we can't even imagine. And you perhaps will be better able to cope with that change throughout your career because you've made yourself better educated in a broader way. So I think you just have to do both. You have to do both the learning how to do the great designs for your fashion career, but you also have to learn how to think better. So education in a more general sense is valuable.
Yeah, I would just echo that absolutely your focus on liberal arts will serve you well, you know, and you know, and bring so much more to your fashion work once you get back into that.
Design and thinking.
Yeah, that's good. And so on that note, so we've talked a lot about the need for collective intelligence, for collaborations, for people who are T-shaped, for being able to cross boundaries. And I think that the three folks we have here today are actually really terrific, wonderful embodiments of that approach to life and business and thinking. And so for sharing their insights today, let's give them a big round of applause.
And thank you to Daniel Pink.
Yes.